Hello again, and welcome to this last part of my Wagner lectures, kind of a finale, I would say. Well, I hope that what my piano teacher Tapani Valstala said, that finale e banale, will not be true of this. But anyway, in this lecture, to conclude the whole series, I shall tell you what happened then, namely when Richard had passed away in 1883. How the festival of Bayreuth continued, and how the Wagner interpretation, staging and singing continued thereafter. And then I'll give you some more sources also which are useful to know. Some of my sources are certainly difficult to get at hand, because I have gathered them in several libraries in Germany, in Berlin and Munich and other places, and copied them from the originals. Because for me, when I write a treatise on Wagner, the most valuable are those sources which are as close as possible to Wagner's own time. So they are for me the most important, and the pertinence diminishes when we go towards our time, unfortunately. And in our time we can find very, very few really truly interesting books about Wagner which have something new to say and which have the full competence to judge this phenomenon. Albeit enormous amount of books appear every year about Richard Wagner, who is the most studied composer in the world, I would say. Anyway, so Wagner passed away in heart attack in Venice, Italy, 1883. I'm sorry, I told wrongly in one of my first lectures that it was in Palermo. No, Wagner and his family went to Palermo in 82 because he thought the southern climate would be very good for his problems with his breast and heart. But anyway, it happened in Venice, and it's told after a very, very heavy family quarrel, because Wagner had again found some interesting Blumenmädchen, flower girls in the, and then Cosima learned it, and then they had a terrible quarrel, and thereafter Wagner died simply. Now anyway, then Bayreuth, of course, continued, but Wagner had given no orders how to continue his festival. So nothing was known. So they had to, those who remained there, and it was a whole community, all the children and their husbands and so, they had to select what to do. And then 1886, Cosima, when she had recovered from her husband's death enough, she decided to take direction alone from 83 until 1930, when she again passed away. So started the new era of Cosima time, and that is interesting because many people who had worked with Richard Wagner himself were there, and they knew how it had been. And I now might like to mention some of these important sources, if you want to know how it was authentically, which is questionable. I told about you already this very interesting intellectual and Wagner's assistant, Heinrich Borges, who had already written an analysis on how Wagner conducted Beethoven's 9th Symphony in Bayreuth in the centenary fest in 1872. And this essay, Die Aufführung von Beethovens 9. Symphonie unter Richard Wagner in Bayreuth, is a very exciting source, I would say, and it is a truly competent and very cultivated analysis of, and I have studied this a lot and been able to interpret this in the context of my new semiotic model quite well. Now it was so that I think Cosima once wrote, when Borges had shown his essay on Lohengrin, that it is too philosophical for them. But for us it is not too philosophical, it is just exciting. And so I think Heinrich Borges is elevated to his own position among these Bayreuth people around Wagner. Another one interesting is, of course, this ballet master Fricke, who was the Fricke. I have copied this. This is an English Wagner in rehearsal, 1875-76, the diaries of Richard Fricke, who was a man like this, who Wagner had hired to teach the singers how to move on stage elegantly and properly. And Fricke also, like Borges, gives extremely valuable first-hand knowledge of how Wagner was on stage. And I would like to quote here one page or one fragment when Fricke tells after the rehearsal of Götterdämmerung that working with Wagner is extremely difficult, as he does not stick to one thing for long. He jumps from one subject to another, and you cannot pin him down for one subject, which could immediately find a solution. He wants to be his own stage director, but for this detailed work, I may say he lacks all it takes, for his mind is always focused on the entirety, losing sight of the details and forgetting how he had wanted things done the day before. So what can we do? And then moreover came his general manner of appearing in front of the musicians. Namely, Fricke tells, I have to say the greatest effort to try to be exact in describing what happened. Wagner regularly speaks in an undertone, indistinctly, gesturing with hands and arms. Only the last few words of a sentence giving you any idea of what he means. And you have to pay close attention. So it was certainly not very easy to follow Wagner's advice, and because he was also changing his mind all the time, there was no such thing like authentic Wagner tradition in staging. So now there are also other eyewitnesses. I have one exciting is by the French composer, director of the French delegation, who was always very big in Bayreuth, Vincent Dandy. Vincent Dandy, he published here Introduction à l'étude de Parsifal de Wagner after the premiere of Parsifal, and he portrays, analyzes the whole opera from his point of view and tells how the French delegation, and listing who they were present, like Chausson and many others, how they were. They did not go after the performance to Restaurant Angerman, which was meeting place of the Wagnerians with beer drinking. So instead they went silently at home, thinking only on what had happened. So I mean that this is also, this type of document is very valuable. Moreover, there were some musicians who had also published interesting, namely one exciting, which is very little known, is by Karl Grunsky. Karl Grunsky was a pianist, and he namely published a book which is a guide how to play piano following Wagner's Tristan. So it is a piano school, advice how to play piano fine, and all the examples are taken from Wagner's Tristan. So he deals with all problems of piano playing, namely Phrasierung, Dynamik, Zeitmasse, tremolo, how tremolo should never cover the harmonic melodic structure, and then Klavierklang, the piano sound, Mehrstimmigkeit, the polyphonic parts, harmony, rhythm, Stim, Stimmen, Treue, and many others. So it's extremely detailed, and well, that is something which certainly all the pianists should know. Grunsky had performed in public his arrangement of Tristan for piano alone, so he strongly believed that these piano arrangements gave the secret of the music. very well, and of course we were living time without any recordings, on any sound recordings, so piano was the only means to get somehow familiar with the musical structure in these cases. Now Cosima as director, she wanted to have it exactly as Wagner had planned it, but the only person who then knew it to her mind was Cosima herself. So Cosima was a kind of vice Richard Wagner, and what she said was the law to all the others. And so developed an idea that the drama, the theater, was the most important fact there, and all the text should be pronounced very clearly, so that singers should not use the legato singing or the vibrato was forbidden, because they should pronounce the words very clearly, and that caused, which was the style, it was called the Bayreuth barking, like dogs, or spitting of the consonants when they just exaggerated the consonants in the text to be heard. Now Cosima, however, she tried to of course hire the best musicians of her time there, and at the same time the staging was quite stagnated into that idea that singers are like living sculptures, living statues, like in what they imagined to be the drama in antiquity. So they had to move in, gesticulate in a very solemn manner, just like what we have seen in those small film fragments from Fröhlich film La Vita di Wagner 1913. So this caused a quite strange style of singing, which then expanded from Bayreuth to all Germany, because the singers were also trained there. About the orchestra, about the staging, I would say that one man who was very progressive, but whom Cosima did not accept, was Adolphe Appia, the Swiss stage director who was specializing in Wagner. And Appia was very much ahead of his time, because he planned totally abstract geometrical sceneries, not realistic, romantic, historic at all. That was all taken away. There were only light effects, and then certain quite geometrical levels, cubes, triangles, squares, planes, and so it was something like, well, Kandinsky, Punkt und Linie zu Fläche, put on stage. And Appia was only later, after the war, when Wieland Wagner renewed the whole Bayreuth style, it became again reality, but in his time it was not so much. Appia published an interesting study, really interesting, Die Musik und Inszenierung, the music and staging, which I've studied, and we have translated something also into Finnish, but that book had, well, some diagrams which show this idea. Here is diagram showing how der musikalische Ausdruck, the musical expression, becomes das Worttondrama, so word tone drama. There were four elements: the dance, symphony, the pantomime, and das Wort, words. So it was something like this in the circle. I reproduced this in my book, a theory of musical semiotics, Indiana University Press, 1994. And another diagram, classification of the symphonic forms. So he liked this idea, these types of diagrams from the same study. So. Well, anyway, I don't think Appia unfortunately had no impact on what happened on Bayreuth, which was just stagnating in that phase. We can have some idea how the orchestra sounded. There is one excellent study which I recommend. It's by Egon Voss, the OSS Egon Voss, on the orchestration on Wagner's operas, and he gives just the idea that orchestral sound was sounds taken individually were like words in language. So August had that Sprachvermögen, the ability to talk, to speak. And so every sound, every instrument had its, we say, denotation in linguistics and semiotics, so basic meaning like a word, and its connotation, it means the side meanings, additional meanings. So for instance, if English horn was something melancholic, like Hector Berlioz said, evoking the past mythical times, then it got some connotation just in when it was used, let's say in Tristan, for instance, or that is not the denotation because it's the sailorman's song, but anyway, I recommend this Voss study because it gives very important definitions of how the Wagnerian orchestra sound was made, and how Richard made everything that it was very smooth and the sounds were blending together all the time, so that like in Lohengrin Ouverture, you could never notice exactly when each instrument group joins. They are just concealed in the sound progress of the music. And of course, the Bayreuth theater was made such that finally the orchestra was invisible. It was there lying in its gap, and no one could see it, and so the sound came just to the listeners from somewhere, for some transcendental or mystic origin, which could not be. Nothing was more unpleasant for Richard than you should be following how the double basses are just fighting with the instruments, or some like bassoon, which he disliked, would be blown by some nervous musician. So that should be all hidden there, and there should be only the sound. Yes, and then we have some recordings of these quite early voices. There is one CD cover which I bought earlier, namely 100 Jahre Bayreuth auf Schallplatte, so 100 years of Wagner singing. It's one Emmy cover. It has a lot of these early festival singers from 1876 to 1906. And so at least there are 3 original voices which are yes, here it is. 3 original voices. They were Herman Winkelmann, Marianne Brandt, and Lilli Lehmann, who were original ones. And about them, we know that Lilli Lehmann was Vogelin, the Helmwige, and Woodbird 1876, and she published 38 recordings for Odeon in 1906, like Sieglindes Du bist der Lenz und Isoldes Liebestod. Marianne Brandt was Waltraute in 76, and then appeared in 3 Kundris 82. From her we have also by Vienna Pate 1905, and from Herman Winkelmann, who was first of the 3 Parsifals 82, we have several recordings. So that, but as you notice, these recordings were made 30 years later when they were in Wagner's conducting, so certainly the voice had changed already and lost some of its qualities, so that we cannot trust. And even other aspects, when passionate Wagnerian gets this CD cover, one is enthusiastic. Aha, now finally we hear how it really was. But unfortunately, when you listen to this, you are disappointed, because the quality of recording is very low, and then also the interpretations sound quite clumsy and helpless to our ears, because we are accustomed with the just perfect faultless interpretations. So it is unfortunately a big disappointment, but of course it has certain documentary value altogether. Now Cosima directed festival until Siegfried, the son of Richard, would come to the age, would be old enough to start, and so it happened. Siegfried was composer himself. He wrote several operas, I was of course totally familiar with that Bayreuth tradition, and he conducted, and they had difficult times because of the inflation in Germany, during which they made an American tournée to gather some money, but it happened so. Now, however, in this time, and even after Siegfried, because Siegfried passed away only some months after her mother had gone. So mother and son, they disappeared too. They both, and then kind of again a new period, and because there was certainly not fight, but some kind of competition. Who will be now the director of the festival? Because Bayreuth was full of all kinds of family people who could claim that they should be, like Houston Stuart Chamberlain, the British man who had married Eva, Wagner's daughter, and many other people had gathered there. There were also types like Bernard Förster. Bernard Förster was an intellectual who published this booklet, Parsifal Nachklänge, allerhand Gedanken über deutsche Kultur, Wissenschaft, Kunst, Gesellschaft. So, and it had just chapters like das Kunstwerk der Zukunft, the artwork of future, and art and culture of the idealists, and then what is Bühnen, Weihfestspiel, singers and heroes, fight against vivisection, so that was animal protection. They were very, and recommendations for vegetarianism, so eat only vegetables. That was one theme which was in these circles very common. And then the social frage, and the last chapter, Neugermanien. Neugermanien was an utopian state which first then tried to establish in Paraguay. And you may have heard about this quite unsuccessful experimentation where the Germans really moved there, but then they mixed with each other, so it was just genetic degeneration among that, and they stayed in poverty, and it was a total disaster. So we had that type of quite passionate Wagnerians who brought the Wagner's ideas to the extremities, to such directions which certainly Richard himself would not be so willing to see. But anyway, the person who took the power was Winifred, the wife of Siegfried, and her story is quite special because she was an orphan from London. She had lost her father 2 years old, and then mother sometime later, and then she was put to some kind of school to be educated, and then she was taken an old couple, Glynworth, at their home because they wanted to support some such case. So it was Carl Glynworth, great pianist, pupil of Franz Liszt, and man who made many Wagner piano arrangements. Richard said that terribly difficult to get the Götterdämmerung arrangement by Carl Glynworth. Anyway, Glynworth took the education of Winifred, who was put to study of course the German culture and of course the Richard Wagner's operas. And then at the end, Glynworth got free tickets to Bayreuth, and then he took with him Winifred, who had then grown up already as a young woman. And then it happened, of course, that Winifred met Siegfried, and they then married. So that was the story. Siegfried was certainly the most sought-for bachelor of the whole Germany at that time, but then this English lady. What's interesting for us, for me as a Finn, is that Winifred was of Finnish origin, from I think from mother's side. He was from Ostrobothnia, Finland, after all. It is strange, but this aspect of Winifred is not mentioned in this biography by Walter Scherz, Paré, Winifred Wagner, ein Leben für Bayreuth. He only said that he was of Danish origin, which is quite strange, but he was of Finnish. I spoke about this with Wolfgang Wagner when I met him in Helsinki at Parsifal. Performance spent whole night together with him in a coffee table, and Wolfgang spoke quite eloquently and gladly about her mother, Winifred, and about her Finnish origin, certainly, and he was quite proud of that. Anyway, Winifred, she was when she came to Bayreuth, Cosima was still, of course, alive, and her first task was she had to clean every day 1 hour the dust upon the Richard's library books, and another hour she had to study French language, which may sound rather funny because all these foreigners in Bayreuth pretended to be very German and tried to forget their origin, if it was England or whatsoever, and just French. And of course, French was mother tongue of Cosima, and French was spoken there. Otherwise, they spoke the Franconian dialect. I thought earlier it was Saxonian, but it was Franconian dialect. It was for me incomprehensible when I met Wolfgang Wagner, and so I lost a lot of information, unfortunately, valuable information, which he quite willingly gave to me. Anyway, Winifred started this direction, and under his style, her time, she engaged Dutchman was one stage actor, and Praetorius was another one, and it was rather progressive, and best musicians of the time came Arturo Toscanini, Wilhelm Furtwängler, and Richard Strauss. We know that Toscanini left, but these two others, they stayed there until the war, and then great singers like Max Lorenz was absolutely one of the permanent stars in Bayreuth. But then we know that that was a very tragical period, and Winifred had to direct the festival through 1930s under National Socialist Party direction, and then until the end of the war. When the war started, Winifred wanted to close the whole festival and leave the musicians home, but then Berlin Führer said that it should continue because it would be a sign of the culture of Germany, how strong it was still even under the wartime, and so she had to keep it open. In that time, Berlin did not intervene in the contents of the performances or stagings. They were what they were, but instead the whole framework became totally political, and one idea was that every German should have possibility to see Wagner, and not only those international rich people and musicians, intellectuals who came from all over the world, but also quite ordinary Germans. And so soldiers returning from the war for holidays, they were brought to Bayreuth to have one night of Wagner. Of course, they would have liked to stay at home with their families, but they had to go there, so it was certainly quite ordeal for these men. But it changed the whole atmosphere, certainly, and that is really sad and tragical moment in the whole Geschichte des Hauses. We have this wonderful interview by Züberberg about Winifred Wagner, and later in mid-70s she was interviewed in this Die Geschichte des Hauses Wahnfried. Villa Wahnfried was the name of the Wagner's home there, and here Winifred tells what she thinks. These 6 hours, there are 2 VHS, because I bought this once in Bayreuth, so, and there she tells everything about her ideas and mine. After war, Winifred was arrested, and like all those who had been close to the leading Nazi party, she was accused to make propaganda but she defended herself, and at the end she had done nothing very grave indeed. Instead, she had been protecting many musicians who were under threat to be put to be expulsed, like Max Lorenz. Berlin said Max Lorenz should not sing there for various reasons, but Winifred answered, if Lawrence goes, then I close the whole festival altogether, and then the time of Wagner will be over. And then they gave up, and so Max Lawrence stayed until the end of the war. After war, Bayreuth was closed, and well, Wagner family altogether, the two sons, Wieland and Wolfgang, they were not saved from being sent to some work commission, and then I think Wolfgang wounded in the front, or even so. So they were just treated like that. One of the children, Friederike Wagner, was the rebellious one, and she left the family for Switzerland first, and later she followed to Thomas Mann to United States. But when she was in Switzerland, Winifred tried to get her back home and travel to Switzerland, but Friederike refused. And then later she wrote a book, Die Schatten über Bayreuth, and he told about the history. There are some funny things also, namely the education was totally free, and so the children of Winifred and Siegfried could quite freely play and move on stage behind the coulissen. And one day, just before a very serious period, Frieden had discovered in the rideau a small hole from which you could look at the audience, and then she went there, and then she shouted to the audience that, do you know that the next opera of my father is entitled The Shit of Cow? No, it was a joke, but fact is that Siegfried's operas had names of the animals like Happy Bear, etc. But then first audience was silent, but then a wave of laughter started to grasp everyone, and then the whole audience, they were just laughing at that, very funny. But then of course they were forbidden to play any longer there. Anyway, Wieland Wagner tried to renew the whole issue, so the old decorations and staging of romantic folkloristic tradition were thrown away, and instead it was totally modern, non-figurative, abstract stage scenes. Here's one book by Wieland Wagner, La survie de théâtre lyrique, and it was like the ideas of Adolf Appia now finally realized there. But Wieland did not have a long life, and so then Wolfgang inherited the place, and then under Wolfgang time continued the idea that the very famous musicians were invited from the global markets to conduct, and one of the best known became of course the French movie maker Patrick Chéreau, who staged the whole Nibelungen ring in early 1970s, and conductor was Pierre Boulez. So that is something which has been seen in TV and as videos everywhere. And it is certainly, to my mind, the way Wagner could be modernized a little bit, I would say, because then the spirit remains genuine and authentic, the drama and the content of the drama it is. And I studied just the Walküre on the basis of this staging. And so Bayreuth continues. I must say that I don't go nowadays there because Germans use Wagner to elucidate, analyze their traumatic history on stage, and for us who are not Germans, it is not so terribly exciting. I think that was certainly not the idea of Wagner, that his dramas would be used for such purpose, because he was not responsible what happened 50 years later. And so I don't know, but very often the film directors are excellent also as opera directors, because they pay attention how the singers act and very close. One of the best is Werner Herzog. His Lohengrin was just splendid, which I saw in Bayreuth. Now I'm getting towards the end, and now I promise to give you some sources. Yes, there are a lot. there are so much, in fact, that one gets, how do I say, immersed and saturated by everything. So one must have a very clear mind to distinguish which source is valuable as something new to say. I told you already that I reject almost all those French intellectuals and their books about Wagner. I'm in favor of French intellectualism. I'm semiotician, I'm structuralist, I'm student of Claude Lévi-Strauss. But what Badiou, Zizek, Lacuna, Barthes, etc., they say is not interesting because I don't think they have competence to say anything about music. One should be a musician a little bit to say something reasonable. That is the fact about whole musicology altogether. But anyway, we have such important and very heavy. Here is by French scholar Timothée Picard, who was he's so-called Normalien from the École Normale Supérieure. His Dictionnaire Encyclopédique Wagner. So here you find, it will be heavy, information about every important person and also about every important movement in Wagner, I would say. So here is going to be Lawrence. There are two Lawrences. There is Alfred Lawrence, who was the scholar, and then we have Max Lawrence. There is strong information. They say that Max Lawrence would have written his autobiography, but I've tried to discover it, but no one knows exactly, because that will be, of course, very valuable. Then, in Wagner's own time, appeared already such huge things. I have here one. It is 1,000 pages. Wagner Lexikon. Hauptbegriffe der Kunst- und Weltanschauung Richard Wagners. In wörtlichen Anführungen aus seinen Schriften, zusammengestellt Karl Glasenapp und Heinrich von Stein, Stuttgart 1883. It was just in the year when he passed away. And it has, first, the list of all the list of all terms, and even the list is very, very long. I must say. And if you want just to study some aspects and you don't know, let's say, what he thought about symphony or revolution or whatsoever, then you can find here quite shortly just a direct quotation of Wagner's work. But then about the Bayreuth, I bought some years ago the heaviest book I ever had in my library. Oh, there are two volumes. This first volume by Oswald Georg Bauer, Die Geschichte der Bayreuther Festspiele. Oh, it's extremely heavy. I remember I bought this in the bookstore in Kantstrasse in Berlin, and then I had to carry this on to the metro station on the other side of the town. It was a very heavy journey, but this has valuable information, namely also pictures of the quite original stage scenes, how they looked like in Wagner's time, and they are certainly very interesting because they give us there the sense how the stage looked. Now, for instance, of course they are very realistic, but here's the Tannhäuser scene. This is from Parsifal. But there are also many iconographic books which I've gathered about just these pictures about Wagner, Wagner stagings, and also about the singers, which are very. Here is das Rhinegold. I don't say that what we should nowadays exactly do the same, but if the director knows this tradition, like I'm glad to say that in the new Helsinki Nibelungen ring version by Anna Kelo, which was inaugurated last year, there is something of these colors and this general style of this, so it looks truly authentic, albeit it's rather modern. So one should know about that tradition. But then, of course, we have the Finnish sources, and of course, even here we have a lot of we have just something. We had one Wagnerian was this music theory teacher Arvo Laitinen in Sibelius Academy, composer himself, who wrote his notes on Wagner. Here is the history of Finnish Wagner performances first, and then comes his translations of all the leitmotifs. So he translated into Finnish all the leitmotifs, and here even the German names and titles are something different from what we have in these piano scores very often. So it is somehow interesting if you study this aspect quite in detail. Then we have some more. Yes, there they are. Oh, this is not important. We have published in the Finnish magazine Synteesi some issues on Wagner, like we have published as early as 1989, Der Deutsche Geist, which has the translation of the Adorno's Versuch über Wagner and Nietzsche's Die Geburt der Tragödie. So some fragments, but something which we otherwise don't even have it in. And then we have had thematic issues like in this 2005 with George Sand and Richard Wagner. They knew, by the way, each other, but George Sand said that we Frenchmen, we don't have the sense for this mythological atmosphere which is so clear in Wagner. Wagner himself studied French language in his boat trip from Riga to Norway by reading the last Aldini, the novel by George Sand. So there was some translation. And then, of course, 2013, the centenary year, which we celebrated in Helsinki with a concert with the help of German embassy, we published a special issue on Richard Wagner also, with some essays, rarities. And then, of course, we have the books about, like we have Pekka Asikainen, the correpetitor and pianist, published a book about Parsifal, which he knows so well. Zum Raum wird hier die Zeit. And then I studied recently myself one Finnish director, Kalle Holmberg, certainly not known for his other works, but he was also Wagnerian, and he started to do the Nibelungen for Stockholm's opera, because, and that happened, which year, I don't remember, something like 1997, maybe. It is Kalle Holmberg's VII also his autobiography, in which he tells about his Wagnerian. And so they invited Holmberg because they thought that this new Wagner stage style by Siegfried and others who made of Wagner such a concrete and steel building Wagner, so modern in that sense, was not the right one. But one should get to the origins of Scandinavian Nordic mythology. And of course the Edda sagor were the first source to Wagner. And so they thought that Kalle Holmberg, who had done the Iron Age in Italy, Italian rewarded TV series about the Finnish mythical times, they invited him to make and it started, I have studied his notebooks and drawings and we have on video the Rhinegold also. But then it was interrupted, unfortunately, and he could never realize it until the end. So, but anyway, you see, this Wagnerian world is so rich that I don't know any longer what to say. It is impossible to make any kind of synthesis because sources are so diverse. But in my future book about Wagner, which I shall now write as my next book, and which I have been preparing for 60 years already in my life, I would say. And by the way, right now I'm completing this lecture series also, which gathers some of my experiences. So I've chosen all those fragments from operas just on my own taste, and which I think are significant. Although one wrote in in France, or as early as 1870s, that Wagner's music is insignifiance and signifiance. So because meaning is never so evident, it is just there. But anyway, here we are with Wagner, and we have our lives with Wagner. I hope it continues, because certainly his artwork belongs to all, and it deserves all new interpretations which we can invent in our time. So, thank you very much.